Civilian life during the Civil War. The residents of the Shenandoah Valley witnessed 325 engagements and 14 battles during the Civil War. They faced large armies of both friend and foe. During the course of the war, it was heart-wrenching to live amongst such scenes. Rampant devastation was brought to all aspects of civilian life. Okay, so the people who lived in Shenandoah Valley, they saw 325 engagements or fights, 14 battles. Um, it was hard to live there. Rampant devastation, lots of devastation or destruction. Before the war, the valley was a land of beauty, diversity, and economic prosperity. A variety of people called the valley home. Settled by Germans, Scots, Irish, Swissers, Mennonites, Quakers, Methodists, Dunkers, etc., making the valley a multicultural region. The people who called the area home were hard-working and ambitious. Economically, the valley was tied to the north, with trade access being easy due to arteries such as the Valley Pike, Shenandoah River, and the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. These avenues drove most of the valley's commerce to D.C., Baltimore, and beyond. So this is just saying that before the war started in the Shenandoah Valley, it was doing good. It made money, it was growing, lots of different people lived there, it was diverse. Um, it had railroads and it had rivers and stuff so you could trade and travel easily. Life would be disrupted in the peaceful valley when John Brown attempted a slave insurrection at the Armory in Harper's Ferry, Virginia, on October 16, 1859. The incident drove fear into local residents about other possible successful slave insurrections. Militia units started to spring into life as a way to monitor any possible threat. All right, so in 1859, that's when the peace was disrupted. When President Abraham Lincoln was elected in November 1860, cooler heads prevailed in the Shenandoah Valley, as the valley was tied economically to the north and was not a slave-dependent society. The nation began to crumble when South Carolina seceded from the Union in December 1860. The Virginia General Assembly convened in February 1861 to discuss secession. The Assembly stayed in session until April 1861. Virginia ultimately seceded from the Union on April 17, 1861, in the aftermath of the firing on Fort Sumter and Lincoln calling for 75,000 troops. While the majority in Virginia voted to secede, 12 of the 19 Valley delegates to remain within the Union. So succeed means to leave the Union. So Virginia ended up leaving the Union. The varied beliefs of the Valley residents made the area divided in their loyalists. During the war, approximately 10% of Winchester residents remained loyal to the Union. There was also a large number of pacifists in the region due to the many religious beliefs. Overall, the area was largely pro-Confederate during the war. So the Shenandoah Valley was mainly for the Confederacy during the war. Um, but there were a couple people who were still for the Union. An example of one couple's disagreements with succession is best said by Caroline Heater of Middletown. We shall have graveyards at every door. My husband and I had some discussion in regard to the merits of war in the beginning. He was a Virginian, and perhaps his sympathies were more for Virginia than for the North, but he never voted for the ordinance of succession. I was not a Virginian and opposed to succession. So this is just talking about how the war is killing people all over the place near their homes, and that some people were for Virginia leaving the Union and some were against it. As companies assembled through the valley in the spring of 1861, people went on with their daily business, excitement in the air, yet innocent to the realities of war. Industrial establishments in the Northern Valley were thriving in 1861, yet with the cutoff of trade to the north and west, prices of commodities went sky high. So trade was cut off, and prices of things, commodities, things that you are used to having every day, they all went up, which means economically, financially, it's going to get worse because if you can't afford, if things cost more, you're putting more money out and you're not necessarily making more money. So that's never good. Julia Chase, a pro-unionist living in Winchester, wrote in 1861, yet, in spite of lack of military action, there was an ever-increasing impact on the daily lives of Winchester residents. The war consumed everything, and the simple everyday task of feeding one's family became troublesome, as food shortages were commonplace, and the few supplies that can be found demanded a higher price. Our, our winter, I fear, will be a hard one. I hope we shall not have a severe one in regards to weather. So this is just saying that prices went up. It was hard to feed people. There were food shortages. Um, and they were saying winter was going to be hard financially and for food, and they were hoping it wasn't going to be bad weather. Stonewall Jackson's 1862 Valley Campaign marked a great transition for Valley residents. No longer would they experience war from reading newspapers or letters. They would witness war's dreadful hand personally as the campaign transformed the Valley region from a home front to a front line. From this point forward, the Valley residents would be in the way of the constant struggle between the North and the South. Mary Stickley commented after the war about her family struggles. Yankees were here in '62. They broke into our granary and smokehouse in the night, and the doors were all open in the morning when our folks were astir. Besides, they destroyed the bolting clothes in the flour mill. One army of the other got all of our horses, and we couldn't use our sawmill anymore because we had no teams to draw logs. We could we couldn't keep anything that was good, and we thought we were having a hard time, but affairs weren't quite so dizzy these days as they were later in the war. We planted our garden every year, but we never knew who'd gather what we raised in it. Okay, so this is just somebody talking about who experienced it, and she said the armies broke into their sheds and their barns and their garages. They destroyed things. They stole their horses. Um, they just it was hard to keep anything. They thought it was hard then, but it actually got worse. So they because the war was being fought literally on their property, the people who lived there were losing their personal items. The Civil War profoundly disrupted the lives of ordinary men and women in the Shenandoah Valley. Those that stayed during and after the war struggled to keep going. They did what they could to continue running the farms and industries. They had to make do despite shortages, and they emerged strong from the utter devastation of war. Okay, so obviously war is going to change life. So it changed the life of these people who lived in the Shenandoah Valley. Um, they just struggled. They fought through. They planted their farms and they kept running their industries and they cut back and made do with what money they could make. Um, and at the end, they actually emerged strong. So that's a positive thing.